Well, the purpose of tonight's hearing, as I understand, was to hear staff's presentation, to hear the owner's side of the story, and to do one thing, determine whether we want to direct you to produce a resolution for consideration at the next meeting. Am I correct?
Councilmember DeLuca, you are correct with regards to what we are looking as with staff. And then the resolution would be in front of you at the next meeting, and
For
then
consideration.
And so you can take whatever additional evidence based on those 2 weeks you want to make your decision. And simply because we draft a resolution and put it in front of you, doesn't mean that it has to be adopted how it is. It's a proposed resolution.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other feedback from staff? No? All right, so, do you want to?
Mayor, I move that we direct staff to produce a resolution for the next council meeting for consideration of the revocation of the conditional use permit as prescribed by statute.
All right. So we have a motion by Councilmember DeLuca. Looking for a second.
Second.
A second by Councilmember Francis. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, the motion carries 5-0.
So just to be clear, if I can, Mayor, it's not a revocation at this point. It's just a direction for revocation. There will be a resolution drafted for the agenda by staff and myself, and then this matter will be considered whether or not to adopt that resolution.
At the next meeting.
At
the next meeting
Yeah.
on the, I believe it's the 27th,
Correct.
on Monday, the 27th.
And I would encourage you to, over the course of the next 2 weeks, stay in touch with staff.
And who should I stay in touch with?
Clarissa or Mark?
Clarissa and Mark.
If you take a look at the letter that was my letter dated May 4th, it's Exhibit 23 in the
Yeah, in the
packet
packet.
agenda. The last paragraph has both, I think is that both Mark's and Clarissa's phone number
Information.
information. So please contact them. The idea is to contact them to make sure, and they'll give you the information you need with regards to what needs to be done.
Okay.
I want to say I appreciate the work that was put into this by the staff. It's a tremendous amount of work, and the patience and the consideration of the council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Next item of business before us this evening is Carview Ventures, 1701 Baker Park Road subdivision application, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, so if not, please correct me. I've not heard it out loud.
It's
Cavu?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Now I know.
Honorable Mayor Council, this item's coming before you after being considered by the Planning Commission at their last meeting, and it's a request for kind of a multi-prong approval consideration, which would ultimately allow a 5-lot subdivision to occur on the subject property. The property itself is located at 1701 Baker Park Road, and the applicant approached the city about the possibility of taking down the existing single-family home on that property and redeveloping the property into a multi-lot subdivision. And we had conversations regarding what could be done on that lot based on the zoning ordinance, and then talked about maybe some alternative ways that lot could be developed. Ultimately, the applicant came forward to the city with a concept plan for a 6-lot subdivision of that property, noting that the property is guided by the city or it's zoned by the city as R2A, which is a single-family zoning district that does allow some multifamily product to be developed on the property. And we have various tiers that can be considered for multifamily, which are dependent on several physical aspects of the property. In this particular case, we said from a staff review that this property could accommodate up to a 4-unit attached multi-family building, so a townhome type building, 4 units attached. And so when we noted that, we also noted that based on the overall land area, it potentially could accommodate more based on the standards in our ordinance. But the restricting factor in this particular case is the frontage on Baker Park Road. And so the property has enough frontage only to accommodate the 4-lot. So the applicant came forward with a concept plan where they said, rather than developing an attached product, we're interested in developing a detached product, which we think will be more consistent with the surrounding properties, given that there are no other attached properties directly adjacent or directly in this area. And so when we looked at a concept plan, they had divided the lot up into 6 villa or patio style homes on the property. The applicant has now come back to the city with a preliminary plat submittal, which is asking for consideration of a 5-lot subdivision on this property. And the city has several vehicles where we could potentially accommodate that should the council want to allow the subdivision of this property in the manner that's being proposed. And the way to do that would be to rezone this property to a planned unit development and then consider a conditional use permit to allow a planned unit development within this district. And that's something that we've done in the city before. The Meadows subdivision, for example, is a planned unit development. Now that was developed in the mixed use gateway zoning district, but within the mixed use gateway, we had considered and issued a conditional use permit to allow the rezoning of that property to what we call mixed use, PUD gateway, essentially, PUD mixed use gateway. So we take our zoning district and then we put a PUD on it, basically create a new zoning district, but it's done so in a way that makes it fairly consistent with the underlying zoning. This property, zoned R2A, allows that multifamily. The applicant in subdividing it looked at the property to be developed. Ultimately is proposing a concept where they would develop a private driveway that would come in off of Baker Park Road. That private driveway would have a turnaround on it that would allow for emergency vehicle turnaround, but it would be constructed by and maintained by an association privately and would not be a public street that would serve the proposed 5 lots on this subdivision. And so with the preliminary plat, what they would be asking for is essentially to break this lot down from 1.31 acres into 5 lots that range in size between about 6,000 square feet and 13,000 square feet, depending on which of those lots as shown on the plan it would be. Within the underlying zoning of the city, that R2A, we have a minimum lot size of 5,000, so you can see how the 6,000 is fairly consistent with what we talk about on a multifamily product. We have a minimum lot width of 125 feet. Now that lot width is really for the overall lot, not necessarily for each individual. Front yard setback of 35 feet, a side yard of 10 feet, a corner side of 25, a rear yard of 25, and a setback from Baker Park Road of 35. Those are the underlying zoning district standards. What they're proposing is minimum 6,000 square foot lot. They're proposing a 15-foot front yard setback from the private drive. They're proposing side yard setbacks of 15 feet total, meaning if you had 5 feet on one side of the line and 10 on the other, it would be a combined minimum of 15, which is greater than our side yard setbacks permitted by the underline. A corner side yard of 15 feet, a rear yard of 30, and a Baker Park Road of 35. So they're deviating from our standard on the corner side yard and really the front yard setback, where they're asking for it to be less, but they are increasing the setback between the proposed units. So with that, they have, the city did a review of the proposed preliminary plat and engineering plans. And we'll just note, I mean, in reviewing the lot, one of the things we had identified early on in the process, there's some significant trees on the property. It's fairly dense in terms of its tree coverage. And you can see by the plan that's being proposed by the applicant, there's really only 4 trees that are proposed to be saved. 2 in the northwest corner on the plan in this area up here, and 2 south. I'm not pointing at Scott's head, but I was hoping.
The glare will get you.
Well, I was hoping to get a reflection, almost like a deflection off of your head. No, so there's 2 in the bottom. So the applicant is proposing to remove the majority of the trees on this site. I will note that both myself and our planning commissioner, Stefan, went out and looked at the site. We noted that the majority of the trees on the site are silver or Norway maples, which are, by tree standards, not a hardwood, not a long living species of tree. In a lot of ordinances, silver maples won't even be permitted. Norway just isn't a tree that's planted that often. But there's one really spectacular oak tree, and then there's a series of evergreen trees which were planted by the property owner. Those wouldn't be native to this particular piece of property, and that really makes up the majority of the trees that would be removed on the property, with those 4 exceptions. The city noted that the reason for the majority of that is trying to accommodate stormwater basins. These are dry basins, they're not wet basins that would be developed on the property. So there's a large basin in the southwest corner, and then there's 2 basins along Baker Park Road. And you can see how vast those basins are in relation to the rest of the property. But they would need those in order to meet the stormwater requirements. And so by developing this property, it triggers stormwater requirements, and in order to meet those, you can see the amount of area that starts to get taken up. If you were to say develop a multifamily product on this site, I don't know that you would really reduce that runoff, because you're going to have a similar amount of rooftop, a similar amount of pavement or driveway, and you're going to have similar amount of disturbance to that site to be able to accommodate, that type of a product as well. Couple other things that we noted, there's no sidewalks being proposed, but with the private driveway and only 5 houses, it's not something that we looked at as being necessary in this case. I think the private driveway would serve those residents to be able to get out to Baker Park Road. We did look at the landscaping and tree removal. The city has a tree removal ordinance. We applied the ordinance to the plan. Ultimately, we identified that there was a few more caliper inches that would need to be proposed on this site, and we did recommend that the landscape plan be revised to accommodate the additional trees. I think that we also noted through comments from Planning Commission and our kind of resident landscape architect, Stefan, that he'd like to see a variety of species, and we noted that as staff as well. Rather than just all evergreen species, we'd like to see some deciduous put back into this site, and I think those are agreeable things with the applicants. I noted there's no signage proposed on this plan. If there was a development sign, they would just have to go through the standard city sign review process. And could be approved by the city staff if it met all those criteria under a separate permit. And then in the fire department review, we noted that this particular configuration with this kind of small cul-de-sac, we want just verification that it does in fact allow turning radius of a fire apparatus. And so we've given them what we'd like to see. There's software that will simulate that, and that can verify for us that it can be accommodated. It does generally accommodate a fire apparatus, but we were questioning whether there might be just a little bit better configuration of this than what's being proposed. I think that's something we could work out with the applicant between preliminary and final plat. We also noted some things on fire hydrant locations just based on snow plowing. We noted that no parking would be permitted on the private street because it's not wide enough, and we noted that the street had to be made a couple of feet wider to be able to meet our private street standard, but things that can be accommodated in this particular layout. We did do a full engineering stormwater utility review. I talked to the engineer again about it. There are some tweaks that need to be made. Again, those would be made between now and final plat. And then they would, upon approval of the preliminary plat, have to submit to Minnehaha Creek Watershed District for their review and permitting. So ultimately what the applicant's seeking tonight is they're seeking a preliminary plat. In order to allow the preliminary plat, we would have those other steps, which would include rezoning, would include approval of a conditional use permit to allow the PUD, and then we call it a general plan associated with the PUD, which really is the site plan that's being proposed. We would recommend, if the council were to consider that, that it's done with the findings and the conditions that were noted both by the Planning Commission and in the memo, or in the report, and by staff in our specific reviews. I'll note that the plan unit development is a tool that the city has that allows you to consider kind of alternative designs, things that are not necessarily allowed by right or by specific use within our ordinance. It's a tool that we have used for something somewhat similar to this in other areas of the city. I will also note that if you were to look at this property, and you can clearly see it here, but if you were to take the strip of land that's guided for R2A in the city, going up and down Baker Park Road and try to find this size lot, you won't find it. This is unique. There is one other property at the very north end of the city I think you could maybe get multifamily on. But outside of that, I think you're going to have to you'd have to see people buying multiple properties and starting to assemble in order to realize this same kind of a concept on other properties. So what the city has at its disposal is the ability to consider this PUD as an alternative if the city were to like the concept of this detached single-family product versus, say, an attached, multifamily product. Which really was how we talked about it when we looked at the concept plan. It was kind of this versus what's kind of permitted under the current R2A zoning. The other thing I want to note is that the applicant did provide the city with kind of concept house types, and I didn't put that exact one in the packet. They provided with some examples. I think I noted that in the packet, but the types of houses that you're talking about are kind of a narrower footprint house, if you will. I did confirm with the applicant that their intent is a single level lookout type house. It may be that they'd have like a bonus above the garage, but the housing style that they want to propose is not a two-story home. I think that is something that we should work with them on agreeing about, because as I noted to Planning Commission, I'll note to you, when we did the Meadows, it was implied that that was what the product was going to be. It was a villa or patio style home. What ended up happening in the world is that didn't happen. We didn't have any provision for that. We didn't have any condition on that. And we got two-story homes. And I mean, I'm sure there's great families and everything living in there, but the scale of those lots with a two-story home, that scale is just different than I think what we had intended. What they're intending is a scale kind of more similar, to that one level house, not a two level. And so I think that's important. I think that's something that council could note. And then, when you look at kind of the massing of what they're proposing in this is kind of a more graphic illustration that doesn't show the lot lines, but one of the things I will note is those driveways are a longer ways off of the private driveway, so there's actually adequate space to park multiple vehicles off of the private driveway. And because they're looking at that 15-foot separation between units, that is gonna, I think, feel a little bit different than the Meadows, where you're talking about 7.5 feet between, or 10 feet between units, up to 7.5 or whatever the setback. So this does give you a little bit wider setback than between units, or separation between units. And you can kind of see how those the massing, how those houses could fit in there. The biggest piece of this development and the reason for most of the tree removal is those detention basins. It's not the houses, but I think it's just something to note. Planning Commission did review. They noted that the basins are dry. That was something they wanted just to make sure it's clarification on. They did talk about whether or not there was going to be any mechanical drainage proposed. That was based on a comment we got from an adjacent property owner who was concerned about drainage to the south. And that's something that we would, potentially be able to work with the applicant on. But as far as those basins, there wasn't any proposed mechanical drainage. It's all overland into those basins. And then there's an overland flow route, which means if they get up to their flood capacity, then there's a route where the water would drain out onto the adjacent properties. And then planning commissioners talked about the turnaround and just wanting to make sure that was condition of the approval, that gets worked out. And then when commissioners had their discussion, their thought was that the single-family product more closely reflected the character of the neighborhood than a multifamily. They were struggling to see how a multifamily would really work in that particular area, and they liked the idea of adding a new product to the city. This isn't a product we really have in the city, and so because of that, they ultimately recommended approval of the action items that are included in the resolution and in your packet. I will note the city received several comments, one written from a property owner that lives to the west of this development. He was concerned about the character, noting the density of the property. And then there was a property owner just directly south asking a question about just the proximity of his existing deck to the subject property. I will note, he's not here tonight, he's down here. And one of the things that when you look at this plan, his deck is 5 feet off of the property line, but you can see there's a substantial drainage or detention area here. So his proximity to these houses is actually in the like 40, 50 foot range, which is going to leave him probably what he has today from some of those structures, or maybe a little bit less, but it wouldn't be right up against. And then somebody else asked about the utilities. They just wanted to know if there's any opportunity to bury. There's a utility pole that runs between the houses on this side and the house on Baker. It runs up the middle here, and there's a pole right at the property line that connects to the existing house. They just want to know if that pole or there's any way the line in their yards would come down. And it was noted that no, that would stay, but this property would be served underground. And so that was one of the other comments. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. The applicant is here as well tonight.
I have a question. So I attended the planning commission, and the sell price of these homes, I'm just wondering if it's comparable to the home values that's already there. And where does Maple Plains sit with affordable housing?
Yeah, I don't know if the applicant wants to comment. I think there was a comment made at the meeting, and maybe you could reiterate where you're thinking that is.
Hello, Chris Ballas. Yeah, in regards to the sell price, these are going to be market rate. There's a development in Minnetrista with West Tonka schools with similar product to this, and I think those started in the 600 range, and they went up based on the build out inside. I'm not exactly sure how that compares to the neighboring properties here, but we feel it's achievable here with this location, Orono School District, et cetera. So
Thank you.
hopefully that answers the question.
I have a concern on that price. With this being a single level home, those are generally purchased by people with mobility type issues, which I'm heading towards that with my bad knees. And that price to me doesn't reflect Maple Plain as being affordable. I have a real hard time with that. That it's priced out of the range. That's why I'm curious as to what the values of the homes around there are at. If this is selling for twice what the homes are valued at in the neighborhood, I think there's a problem. I also think 5 is too many. That it's cramming a square peg into a round hole.
Other comments or feedback?
Mayor,
Yes. Councilmember
I,
DeVito.
I appreciate you wanting to do what you can on a piece of property. And I appreciate the fact that this has an opportunity for the city for additional homes, additional sewer, additional water. But I'm concerned about things, as Mark, you went through. Setbacks from the sides that are averaged versus a setback in our zoning that says, or our regulations that say thou shalt be X number of feet from the property line, never implied that that would be an average of this side and that side to be something. It was, that's an absolute in my book. We've got side back deviations, front elevation deviations. There's a reason why our zoning regulations have front setbacks. We've deviated off of that. We're asking council to deviate off of rules that we had. And the very concern that we're trying to put 5 homes in an area that does not fit the, as was stated in the public hearing at the planning commission, doesn't fit the character of that part of town. And we are responsible for establishing the character of that. This doesn't fit into this area, folks. It just simply doesn't fit in here. I don't like the private road layout on a preliminary plat. And yes, I understand, Mark, that any of these things could be worked out between the preliminary plat and the final plat. I've done platting. I know how that process works. But I'm surprised we would even bring a preliminary plat to planning commission that is as far off as what it seems. Usually those things are worked out well in advance, and the preliminary plat is pretty darn close to what the final plat is going to be. This preliminary plat isn't even close to what it would need to be. You went through 5 minutes worth of, well, this has to be changed, that would have to be changed, this isn't quite right, the road isn't wide enough, the setback isn't big enough, we're not sure if the trucks could turn around in there. You got a dead end up on the top, on the north. I can't imagine public works or public service would be too happy about trying to go in there and start backing the fire trucks into there. This doesn't fit. The boundaries, the setbacks are very need to rezone this property in order to pull this off. It feels like we are trying to force something here versus, and don't get me wrong, I would love to buy a $600,000 home on a small footprint with very little thing custom built. I'd probably be your first customer to buy a home like that. However, this is just too many homes on a small footprint. And we just got done with the discussion earlier in this meeting about something that doesn't fit on the footprint, did we not? And now here we are again asking the same thing. I learned from history. You come in here and ask for 2, maybe 3, it's an awkward sized lot. I'm gonna be way more willing to look at something like that. I am not supportive of 5.
So I have a question for clarification. I'm not sure if this is for Mark or for Mr. Bowles. So you had referenced private street. So is this going to be a city-owned street that we're maintaining and taking care of? Or is it like the Meadows and an association and they would be responsible and that's why they can have the different?
Yeah, so it goes to your point, council member. So the private street in this particular case is private.
Okay.
So no city
Yeah.
staff, right? So we did meet with the fire department on this. They're fine with this layout. They questioned that little bulb and said, we're not going to use that. We're going to use the hammerhead. So what we said is maybe we just ought to look at it. I think from a plat standpoint, though, this is going to be identical to what you see back. The road design might be tweaked, but the plat would be the same. We're not changing the lot configurations or anything like that. And so a lot of the things that I presented, stormwater basins, things of that nature. Those are technical tweaks, not plan tweaks. So we're talking about they've got to, show us a different calculation, and we have to verify that more so than it is reconfiguring any of this. So we feel that the plat that's in front of you is going to look exactly like that when it comes back. Now, the design of the road, that little bulb, we're talking, do we really want that little bulb, or maybe does that get squared off, or maybe does it get broadened out a little bit within the footprint that's shown there? That's something that we wanted to maybe spend another set of revisions on and then bring back. So the setbacks, though, I will speak to that. In a city right-of-way, we have setbacks from the city right-of-way, and we have those for various reasons, to allow sidewalks, to allow public utilities, things of that nature. In this case, we will have public utilities down the middle, but we are not going to be the ones maintaining the street, and we're not asking then for some of the other public improvements, like a sidewalk. We're also saying you can't park on this private driveway. And so when we're talking about some of the setbacks,
Private driveway?
I'm sorry, the private
Drive.
street. Yeah, I mean, I look at this as a private drive more so than a private street. A street to me would imply it goes somewhere. This is just
That's
a
a dead
driveway
end.
that comes in and out. And that is one of the main differences between the Meadows and this. We did the private street in the Meadows. We've had a lot of kickback on that. I would tell you, I'm an absolute. I'd advocate against private streets for cities if they look, function, and feel like a public street. This doesn't. This wouldn't. I think this would feel much more like a private driveway that would serve these homes. And because it then doesn't extend or go somewhere, it's not through. I think that does change how the city could potentially look at it. The only other thing I'd offer to your point, and I appreciate that, I understand this lot, when you look at it and you look at the 5 lots, it looks like a lot when you're thinking about it in relation to what else is there. What the applicant noted when they came into the city the first time is, what can I do by right? What can I do that the ordinance allows? And today the ordinance allows them 4 attached units. So when we were looking at it, we said 4, which they need, the more units, the better the price, the more affordable this thing can be. And we looked at it as 4 versus 5, right? Because the 4 is attached. Now, you could say that the footprint of a 4 is less, but the 4 would still have a private driveway with a hammerhead type turnaround on it, because it would be, essentially the same kind of private driveway that would serve that. If you look at, say, the new townhomes that are going in across from the Cassia project next to the Holiday, those are multi-unit buildings. They have private drives with kind of dead-end configurations on them. We serve those for fire, so we reviewed kind of that same
But
layout.
That's Medina.
Well, it's our fire though, so
Yeah.
yeah.
But
But
I don't want to compare against another city.
no, I'm just saying for fire, if you look at kind of how those are set up with private driveways, we looked at those similar, but so those were the kind of ideas that we were looking at when we were comparing this, was kind of a 4-unit attached townhome building to a 5-unit detached single family, was more the baseline of why we were comparing those, not kind of 4 to 1 single family. The only other thing I'd offer, I could show you on my screen. I mean, I know it doesn't seem like it, but if you look at the character of the area, I'll just show you quick, because when I saw the comment that came in from the adjacent property owner, I did look at it, because we try to do that, but if you look at, and I'll zoom in a little bit, if you look at that box, this box that's here, if you took our box here and you just slid it over to this corner here,
6 houses.
that's 6, and that's the same exact size box. I can't do it, I can't show you on here, but just look at it proportionally.
Well, you can. You've got
You can
tools
see
up
it.
there in the upper right-hand corner.
I
You
know,
can draw.
I was trying to draw, but
Put him on the
Don't put him on the
spot.
spot.
Yeah,
Leave
I was
the man
trying to do
be.
it. Yeah, so I have to draw it. I can't move it on here. I could do it on my software, but it does. That I know it doesn't seem like it, but when this property owner kind of addressed the city, they said, "Hey, it's not like the area." And I took this box and I put it right right here, and I go, well, that's
But
6.
visually, you can see it. Just-
Yeah, with,
Yeah,
even
I can
without
see
doing it.
Mark, would 4 on that footprint, could it be designed in a way that would not have to bend setback requirements?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about front yard setbacks, right? So,
And side, because you mentioned both of them.
well, so the side is, they're actually proposing bigger side yard setbacks than what our ordinance says. So the averaging thing is, I actually like it, and it's not black and, I mean, it's not gray. So if you got a 5 yard on one lot, the other one has to be 10. And that's it. It's 10 on that side, 5 on this side. So the combined, but then on the next lot, the guy who's got 5, he gets 10 on his other side. So at the end of the day, you get
Yeah, it's
kind
a
of the same
wash.
building pad, and you get, we're getting bigger separation, not smaller.
And we're not running the utilities through the front, right?
Right. So,
is-
so the 5 is kind of common in planning. Nowadays, I'll be honest with you, everything nowadays is 5. Everybody wants 5 and 5, and it's too narrow. So, what our ordinance says is 5. I like 15 because it's better. Any bigger separation is better.
They're smaller than 9,500 lots. I mean, they're 65 to
Yeah.
8,500 square feet. I mean, it's
Yeah.
proportional. The setback is sufficient.
It is. It's bigger. So we're getting bigger side yard. It's the front they're asking for a reduction in the front off of the private street. So
Mr. Bullis would like to speak.
If I can address a couple points there. Maybe it'd be helpful if you put that, one of the
yeah, I can go back.
overheads back up. The idea behind the front yards being less than, I think they're what, 15? It was so that we could accommodate bigger space in the backyards to buffer the existing neighborhoods from these new homes. And I thought we had some pretty overwhelming support, I think, from the neighbors directly adjacent to all this. And they'd rather see this type of product there than a 4-lot or a 4-building townhouse.
Let me see.
So that's, I think we can accommodate a bigger front yard setback, but that would mean we'd have to move those house pads back and reduce the rear yard, and I don't think that makes sense, because anyone buying into this project is gonna want this little community feel inside that. And then we don't affect the neighbors as much. The bulb on the hammerhead, that's a traditional hammerhead that's designed off of the fire code standards, so a truck will work on there. The bulb was something that they just added. The engineering thought that that would look better as you pull into that neighborhood for the 2, I think it's lot 3 and 4. So that was just kind of a visual thing, and we can make it look like a regular hammerhead and still fit it in there. We can also make those lots bigger to take up more of those, that common space. If we're talking about square footage of the lots, for instance, lot 2 there could be quite a bit bigger and include that basin, et cetera. If it's just a technicality as far as the way that it's laid out, if we need more square footage on each lot,
Who own those basins?
the
That
association
comes
would.
Because they're private.
So hopefully that answers a few of the questions on why it's laid out like it is. It's, so.
Mayor, can I?
Yes, Councilmember Fay?
Mark, I've got a few points of clarification, but before I get into those, I want to respectfully disagree with some of the things that Councilmember Francis and Councilmember DeLuca mentioned tonight. I'll deal with Councilmember Francis. Unless we're going to give direction to staff to begin discussions on determining how many and where affordable housing is going to be, I do not believe it is the city council's position to tell a potential developer what he can build and what he can market it for, if he's talking about market rate prices for his housing stock. That's that. As far as your comment, Mike, a PUD is a very useful tool that a city has in their vast toolbox to build certain things where maybe the land use requirements don't allow us it. And I think the setback provisions are adequate. Proportionally, I think it lays out well, and I'm hoping you're not equating 4 houses versus five houses based on setback requirements that we have without utilizing the PUD. Because once we switch and approve this as a PUD, it gives us tremendous amount of leeway. But then, of course, there's a conditional use permit, so if you want to start slapping on some conditions, then we can do that too. But let's at least allow him the opportunity to designate this as a PUD, stick with the 5 houses, and then if you want to tighten the straps as far as other conditions, then you can. That's all I wanted to say on those 2 matters. I do, Mark, have a couple of questions. As far as the single level, 1 level housing, would it be possible, as far as a condition, yes, you can specify it as single level, but maybe put it as a height restriction? Because I know if you go to a 12-12 roof, or pitch on your roof, now all of a sudden you've got a lookout, so you're 4 feet in the ground, but you're 4 feet up. You got a tall stoop, then you got a single floor, and if you do a 12-12 pitch, and all of a sudden we got a loft or a mother-in-law apartment or whatever you want to call it up on top of it, before you know it, this thing is enormous standing out of the ground. So maybe determine what a happy compromise is, and just saying, instead of saying single level, cap it at a particular height from grade. I know it's a private development, which would mean a private road maintained by the homeowners association, but I looked at the schematics of the road construction. Is that sufficient? I mean, 3 inches of a wear course?
I think we have a comment on the construction, so that was one of our technical comments.
Okay.
And we would bring that to what we'd consider a private road standard, but that would be sufficient.
8 inches of class 5 and 3
Yeah,
inches of a
Bonamink
wear
commented,
course?
but I can't remember exactly, but yeah, we talked about the standard for that road being upgraded.
Okay, and then the retention basins. And I know there was comment in the planning commission and comment from a resident about water and standing water. Now, the 2 retention bases that are on the east side of the property, it looks as though once they overflow, they must drain out to the swale that is on the west side of Baker. Am I correct?
Yes.
So they overflow, they get a foot or a 1.5 foot depth, and then they drain into the basin and work to the south. Is
Yeah,
that
they
correct?
go, so if you look at the 2 that are on the Baker Park,
Yep.
we have this little yellow
Yep.
arrow.
Yep.
These are called emergency overflows, so ultimately that's where they go. They'll go into the ditch and then down and out.
Correct.
And this one,
That's the one I'm concerned about.
It's gonna go
Where's
south.
that going? I
So-
looked at the elevations, and it's going into someone's backyard.
yeah, so there is, this property already drains this way. And so what those basins have to do is they do 2 functions. One is they maintain the level or rate of runoff from that property at the pre-existing condition rate to the post condition. So whatever the water coming off that property was before, it can't exceed that in those
So
locations.
this delineation was done by Minnehaha Watershed?
Nope. So their engineer, the developer's engineer, does a HydroCAD study. They do a
Okay.
calculation and they look at it. We comment on it. We do have some comments on the drainage, but then also Minnehaha Creek will as well. And the intent of these basins is to capture the runoff being created by the new impervious surface, and 1, control the rate, and then 2, control the quality. So we're going to improve the quality of the runoff essentially that comes off this property, and we're going to maintain the rate of runoff. In all reality, the neighbor who has the swale that comes down from up here and comes down into the backyards, that should be better.
Okay.
in the after condition. Our requirement isn't that it has to be better, it has to be the same, but this tends to stop a lot of that water, and we have a lot of buffer built into these, so I would say that it should help.
And then the last thing would be the landscape plan.
Yeah.
And I agree with
Stefan.
the trees plan. Tree planting is fir, spruce, pine.
Yeah,
And
all
let's-
of these are,
Yes.
perimeters are evergreen, which there is
Yeah.
some, justification, like at the end of this road, we don't want cars coming in into here with headlights going into the backyard, so the
Correct.
neighbor did comment at the meeting, they were appreciative. But there's opportunities throughout the site, I think, to put back some of the shade trees that historically kind of had been there, and that would be something we'd work with to revise this so we had a final landscape plan.
Other than that, I think it's wonderful.
Any other comments?
I would just say that I'm fine with the density. I think more housing is good housing. My concerns were with the road. I think specifically, I think it's unrealistic to not have any street parking, even if the driveways allow, just knowing neighborhood functions. The no parking on Bud I was fine with because we had parking lots at the park across the street. And I don't think I'll win any other support with this, but like Mark, I'm not for private roads generally, especially after what we've had with the Meadows. So I actually, first of all, I'd ask, is there room to make this as wide as a normal city road?
Gets tight.
Yeah, it's tight,
Yeah.
okay.
I can't tell you 100% for certain that you can't. There is actually quite a bit of room right in here,
Yeah.
and if you look at the layout of those houses, those driveways go back.
I'd say in the least, look into the spots that the fire department suggested for guest parking or.
And that's one of the things that I think we talked about with staff and then with the applicant a little bit. Is there an opportunity, instead of having on-street parking, to have some pull-off spaces? Very typical multifamily developments where you'd
Yeah.
have some guest spaces that are programmed, real spaces. And I think maybe there's an opportunity in here to do that.
Similar to Gateway Boulevard, kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
where the bus turn. Is it 20 or 24 wide?
Well, we want 24. It's 20 proposed.
Got it.
Yeah. So that will be amended.
Representative right there, it's 20?
Yes. So essentially 2 feet on
2 feet
either
each
side.
side.
Yeah.
So Councilmember Cahill asked one of my questions as well. I was just curious if it could be turned into a city street, but understand. And I just, to Councilmember Francis's point, I just want to say, I believe there is a need for this in our community. There was many people who ended up leaving because they couldn't own in Haven homes in the independent living. And what they're paying a month is far more than what they'll pay for a mortgage on this type of home. So
Okay.
hopefully that makes you feel a little better. But
Mark, where would the city have any right-of-ways in this development?
We won't.
Nothing?
All we'll have is easement, and so we'll have this blue box here, or this outline of these properties. Those are going to be the boundaries of the private properties. We'll have drainage and utility easement across all of that to service our utilities.
But a water main break.
It's the cities.
It's the cities.
Those utilities are going to be built and inspected as public utilities, which it's a good hybrid because then the residents aren't stuck with all of that. We're good at maintaining utilities. I mean, say what you want, but
Where would the water lines be?
yeah, I can show you.
Middle of the road?
Yep. So if you look at this plan right here, so you can see in blue sanitary sewer right here, comes down the middle, and then water main separating. We need a separation. So then the water main comes down in the
Is
blue
water
line.
coming off of Baker?
Yes.
Okay.
Both sewer and water come off. And
So-
then there'll be individual service lines that are private, like our regular ones.
So a sewer line breaks in the middle of the road, under a private road. Who's gonna put that road back?
It would be back to the city's utility for doing that.
And that's
So
kind of my
we
concern,
would dig
too.
it and patch it. I mean, it would be like if we did it under a parking lot, if we had, we have areas in the city where the sewer line doesn't necessarily follow the road only. This would be fairly typical. I'll be honest, the Meadows is exactly the same way, where we have the public utilities, private road. And we have the same easements that we would have on this.
Is
development.
our sewer down the middle of the private road?
It is in the
But
meadows.
but the sewer and water is gonna be to city specifications.
Built in, yes, built in, inspected,
But the
and
road
operated.
surface may not be.
Right, and part of that is, if you guys think about it, so we have water coming in here, and then we have water coming up, and we have a hydrant. So that's a public hydrant that we would maintain and service for fire protection. And so this, the water line, and then the sewer comes in, so we'll have a manhole here and a manhole here. But it's just like our regular sewer. Anything that's off of the main is the homeowner's responsibility, which would, it would kind of function
halfway.
identical. The road is, I really despise private roads. They don't ever work unless they're done in a way that just doesn't feel like a road. So the more this doesn't feel like a public street, the better it's gonna be. And we'll go back to our multifamily and townhomes all the time. We have 4, 6, 8 units in a townhome building with a private driveway, and all their stub driveways come off of that, and those are all private, and nobody ever calls the city and says, hey, you guys should maintain my driveway, right? It's private, and it happens. And I look at this similar. This is probably, to your point, getting closer to not being that way.
I didn't
And-
see,
And so I always say, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck. And so you try to get away from that, and you're gonna get calls. I mean, you guys know on Oak, right? But Oak looks, feels, acts, functions like a public street.
No
Well, and then the
storm sewer,
park
right?
there.
Yeah, this does not have any below grade or mechanical storm sewer. It's all overland into
Any
the ponds.
curb?
Is there a rolled curb on the, no, so coming into this, there's no curb on this. Let me go
I
back
saw
to-
something about a shoulder or something like that.
Yeah,
I didn't quite know
that's what I
how
was
to
trying
read
to
that.
say. I think Dave commented on that. Do you know, Chris?
I think it's a standard shoulder. I don't believe there's curb
Hold on.
on gutter there, but.
It is, I thought I had it right here. I don't see that detail on here. Shoulder section is just an aggregate shoulder. So they show us a shoulder, but it's not gonna be curb, which again kinda goes back to the driveway thing. It's more of a residential feel than a
Shared driveway.
than a city street feel.
What would the city receive by way of park dedications for this?
So our standard park dedication, their fee would be applied to these individual units. We would do the math for you with the final plat, but we were proposing no park dedication granted for anything in this development, so it'd all be cash in lieu of.
Yeah, 10%, right?
Yeah, 10% of the value, and I'd have to do the quick math on that number.
Yeah, give me a ballpark.
Is it, what's our per acre number, do you know? If you give me 1 minute, I'll tell you.
Yes, you will. Sewer access goes to Met Council, water access goes to the city, correct?
We get our
We
own
get our
sewer
own
access
sewer.
as well. There's
Small
two.
then.
Yeah.
While he's doing that, Scott, is there a tool, something that can be recorded against the property that kind of calls out for the homeowners that, in bright lights, this is a private street and you're responsible for the maintenance, blah, blah, blah?
Well, my understanding from listening is that this is gonna be governed by a homeowners association. Probably the best tool would be to have it in the homeowners association documents, so, I would suggest having a condition that we review those to make sure it has conditions in there that we want, and plus we're dealing with the fact that the street and how that's handled and those kind of things, and it may have in their language with regards to the easements that we get, so, if we didn't have the HOA documents, declarations can be put, on there. One city we had, there was think there was a development and it was next to an RV park, like an RV park, but like sales. And we had a condition that, well, in there, you know, there was something recorded against the property that said, just so you're aware, this is over here. So, but if we have HOA documents, that can handle it, but there can be a condition in there that there has to be some form of a notice or something that takes care of it, and we can figure out the best tool prior to plat release.
Yeah, I just wonder how many people are aware, like if they buy on Oak, if they know, because you're rushing to buy a home, how
Back in '92, we were looking at property